Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, a podcast where we talk about storytelling at the intersection of structure, play, and imagination. I'm your host, Gerald Ford, and today I'm joined once again by someone who's practically a patron saint of narrative craft on the show, Jim Zub. Comic writer, game designer, teacher, and the ongoing wrangler of Conan the Barbarian, Jim's voice is one of the most trusted in storytelling across formats. Now, we've talked about this topic a lot over the years, but today we're going to go deep into a particular challenge. How do you write something new inside a story that already exists? This episode is about adaptation, but not in the generic sense. It's about what happens when you're tasked with writing from within, adding new truth, new meaning, and new structure, but without breaking canon. So let's get into it. Jim, welcome back.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It is always a pleasure. Always.
Are you sure? Always?
Yes.
If you say so.
There's stories, but we'll save those for another time. Okay, so you've been here before. In fact, I think you've been here more than anybody else at this point. So that means
say that.
What are you
trying? That's dangerous and strange.
I think that means Forbeck will be on the phone shortly here, trying to get on the show. Yeah,
that's right.
Okay. Let's rewind a bit for people who are just tuning in, haven't listened to one of the previous ones. I don't want the full origin story, but maybe touch on the moment early in your career where you realized you had a knack for inhabiting existing characters, touching into mythologies. What really made that storytelling click for you?
I don't know in those specific terms. Like I said to myself, I am inhabiting these characters. I am living in this story or whatever. But just, I think in a different sort of manner, I think a lot of kids, they hit a formative age and they're looking for structure in their lives. Like they want to understand all the things. You know, there's that age of kid where they're just asking why 400 times. There's that weird other moment where you go, I assume everything in the universe is organized in some capacity. And we all throw ourselves into some kind of nerdity, or it doesn't even have to be nerdy, you know, whether it's sports statistics or Pokemon or the handbook of the Marvel universe or role-playing games or all those kinds of things. We obsess over structures. We obsess over systems. We obsess over, and for some reason, the knowledge that comes from our hobby comes to us easily, as opposed to, you know, functional education and things that we should have been pouring ourselves into. So, yeah, there were definitely times when I could feel that the stuff was coming really naturally. I'd be reading through whatever D&D books and your brain just absorbs it like a sponge. But then when I would be running games for my friends, I wouldn't feel like I had to just regurgitate it back, like that I could give it my own little spin, or I would realize the players were doing something a little off book. I mean, it's role-playing games. That's the whole point of the thing. And that I was more than willing to kind of lean into it. And that's really what tabletop role-playing games taught me, was that the game is the guide. The game is not, you know, the absolute, that you need to be able to chisel out your own little, you know, sections and make it your own, even while adhering to a general structure, or that people would still be able to recognize this as the World of Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms or whatever other stuff we were doing. That I could tell you that we were going on Ravenloft, you know, the original module, but that at the end, you know, these players were going to take over the entire castle and become the Barons of Barovia or whatever, you know. And so that was the kind of thing that taught it to me. And then realizing in a professional sense that those skills were going to be extremely formative, that I had to do all those same kinds of things, bring a level of knowledge, but always be flexible to kind of make it my own or convince other people to take the path untrodden or something, you know?
Yeah. Cool. That's smart. No, I like that. Well, let's take that and move it into the topic of the day, which is telling stories within established IPs and worlds, basically adaptive storytelling, as I'm going to call it today.
That's a good term. I like that. Adaptive. It is
storytelling.
A constant moving target, you know, for sure.
Well, that is actually exactly what I want to talk to you about, because you've adapted Rick and Morty, Dungeons and Dragons. You've done some work in Pathfinder, and now Conan, obviously. So,
Marvel superhero stuff and Samurai Brack and a little bit of everything.
oh, good Lord. Yeah. 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 I often refer to you as the most prolific person I know. So,
I don't know. I worry about that because it's sort of like I've definitely had years where there were bursts of it and it almost killed me. And now I feel like I'm in a good flow. So I never want to feel like I'm rushing it out the door. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, if cool opportunities are coming my way, I definitely want to be able to, I don't know, creatively Aikido those onto their, intended targets or whatever.
there's a good term.
There we go. Yeah.
Creative
So,
Aikido.
sorry, what was the specific question?
Well, I was kind of setting the stage for us
Oh,
here in your work in all of these various established universes, worlds, IPs. To start with, how do you identify the voice you need, the tones? How do you shift gears between them? Do you have kind of like an internal tone compass, basically, for moving between worlds?
right. I definitely do a lot of research. So whatever the property is, whether it, something animated like Samurai Jack or Rick and Morty, I'm gonna watch, as much of it as I can get my hands on, or particularly the best, episodes I can find or remember. And same thing with reading. I'm reading comics. I'm reading, literary source material for something like Conan or delving into tons of comics. But I'm reading with an eye for research. So I almost always have a pad of paper beside me and stuff that stands out to me, really interesting little bits of dialogue or questions that I'm having as I'm watching or reading. I will just jot them down. And usually those questions will be answered over the course of the story. But sometimes they're just like things I'm feeling or atmospheres that are coming up or interesting turns of a phrase. Not because I want to copy those exactly in what I do, but these are the sort of like hot points that are jumping out at me as I'm taking in that material. And it creates a bit of a, yeah, like a dartboard that I can kind of look at and go, okay, these are closer to the target or to the kinds of things that I'm feeling or that seem very important to me, through lines that I can hopefully use in my own work when I'm starting to work with them. Or I can use them to either lean into or to contrast against what people expect from the property. You know what I mean? And so those things become really important to me. And then I'm giving it my kind of first analysis before I'm reading other people's reviews or other analysis. And I will do that. Like sometimes I'll watch whatever YouTube videos on what are the best Samurai Jack episodes or what do people love about Rick and Morty and see if that's additive or, if they're coming at it from a completely different angle. Cause sometimes it can supplement what I'm doing. And other times you're like, oh, okay, I'm on target. They're saying things that feel similar to what I'm talking about. Um, and then, of course it's working with really good creative teams. So your artist, your editor, bouncing those things off of them or trying to get on a call where you're just jamming and you're just chatting about the thing so that you've got a sounding board for like, does this sound like the kinds of qualities or the types of things that engage you and interest you and excite you? Because this is what is exciting to me, or these are the types of things that I feel. And it becomes a little bit of it's like a momentum builder where you're just ricocheting those things back and forth. And even if they're just saying, yes, 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 great. But if they suddenly go, well, why are you saying that? Or, that's not how we see the property. Then it's that interesting thing of like, can I convince you or are you going to convince me? And like tug back and forth and kind of get a feel for it. And the earlier in the process I can do that, the better it's going to be. I don't want the first material that I send to be like, here's the fully outlined pitch. Hope you like it, hope it hits the things that you need. I'd rather have those kind of brainstorming sessions verbally first and make sure we're kind of in that general direction and then kind of go back, use that momentum, hit it really hard. And it means you're not going to be doing as many drafts. They're not going to, I'm a plotter more than I'm a pantser, the terms, right? Like,
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah. And so that works really well with IP because I tell you what I'm going to do and then I do the thing I tell you I'm going to do. And there are little happy accidents and surprises along the way, but usually I follow a pretty tight outline, which when you're working with intellectual property and sometimes multiple levels of approval, something like Rick and Morty versus Dungeons and Dragons, where you have Adult Swim, the Rick and Morty creators, you've got Dungeons & Dragons, and then the specific, license holders, for D&D. You're trying to please, and then the publishers, right? You've got IDW and Oni Press and the artists and everyone else. And so you're trying to please all these masters and please yourself creatively, right? And so there's this kind of a weird feeling where you have to, in that pitch document, in those brainstorming sessions, you're really trying to not just create consensus, but sort of bring people on board and go, this is the voice, this is the idea, this is the core theme. We all good? All right, I'm going to slam it into overdrive. Now's your chance to stop me. Otherwise, we're going this way.
Right.
And that's kind of the key with those sorts of things is getting buy-in from everyone creatively. And if you don't have it, not immediately assuming the worst of everyone involved. Like I know some people that can get really obstinate, like they don't get something approved and they're like, I'm a genius. Why won't they let me do what I want to do? And you're like, well, clearly, like our job is communication and entertainment. So you have to communicate more clearly why they need to go that way. What is the entertainment value? What is the, whatever the cold commercial value of the sales possibilities of how do we market this and how do we, get it out to as big an audience as possible? And so just stepping back a little bit and getting a better sense of what those needs are on an IP level, on a corporate level or whatever, and then trying to thread your stuff through it is just going to make you a more valuable, kind of part of that team.
Right. Brilliant.
Whoa. Thank you.
When you're, well, it was, dude. Like,
okay, thank you.
Why are you questioning me?
I don't know. I'm a writer. I don't take compliments. This is crazy.
Work on that. Okay. Well, while you're tracking an IP, you're researching, or even when you're working on an IP, have you in the past noticed a tone shift? Say something that was humorous becomes too serious. Is there a point where it's too far? How do you monitor that?
I mean, here's the thing, like you sort of take the temperature as you go through a project, but just day to day, week to week, month to month, a project has a lifespan. And over that lifespan, like everything I do, everything any creative person does, it's a bit of a time capsule for who they are in that moment, right? Like when I read some of my earliest stuff, I both know that I did it, but I'm also a different person than the one who made that, you know what I mean? And I know what my values were or where I was at that point in time. And so if I'm feeling something sort of shift, it's like, is the state of the world different? Is my attitude? Am I becoming more cynical? Am I frustrated? Am I getting some of that out on the page? Like, and just being honest with yourself about why you're kind of doing what you're doing or what you're sort of feeling. And then being willing to either bring it back in or lean into that and just sort of go, I'll give you an example. So, Conan is wrapping up at Marvel much earlier than I had originally anticipated. And I think anyone involved had anticipated because of the pandemic. It seems very hyperbolic now, but like there were months there where I thought, oh, this is the end of the North American comic book industry. Like all the stores are shutting down and distribution's shut down. And, most of the people I knew that were freelancing had these pencils down orders where they were not working. And we were like, oh, like I'll never see the end of this story and or my career is toast. And then I was told, yeah, I came back on Conan and for a handful of issues and they were like, we're wrapping it all up with a bow. Your last issue is going to be 25. And so I was feeling pretty low and wistful and weird and frustrated that this thing that was really important to me, I wasn't going to get to do a long, seminal run the way I'd hoped or get to a bunch of the story material I wanted or things like that. And so the last story became about the impermanence of stories. Like I just leaned into my own kind of fears and the weird anxiety in the air of lockdowns and everything else and just sort of said, you can read this story on its own merits, but if you know when it came out, it might have different resonance for you, And the last bit of the story is this kind of a downbeat with a slightly hopeful uptick of sort of these stories never end, just our time with them does or whatever. And it's like, well, it's sort of dark, but not completely shutting the door on all light or whatever. Because that's how I was feeling, because that's how a lot of us were feeling. And so in that case, the tone shift was just kind of F it, this is what I feel and this is what I want I'm going to mark the milestone for better or for worse, you know? And that's okay too. If it comes from somewhere true and you can justify it, then I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. Just making sure you're not like dragging your collaborators into somewhere unexpected, that they all kind of know what we're getting.
Right on.
I think that's key.
When we study traditional literature, we study the history of the time it was written, the author, their life situation, what's happening in their life, because that influences and impacts what they're creating. It sounds like there's the same space inside of IP-driven comic books.
I don't think, there's any other way to do it. I guess you could cold hard template these things and be like, well, I'm writing for, this audience. I will give them the latest gruel, from the template factory. And there's always moments where a project isn't what you want it to be, or the collaboration isn't quite as sparkly as you'd like, and you kind of get it over the finish line and go, okay, got that one through the filter. But most times everyone wants to be passionate about what they're doing. And if you've got the time to make it better, or lean into the best qualities of it, obviously that's what we all want to do. Sometimes some of the criticism that you see about media, about comics, about games, about movies, they're mean-spirited in a way that speaks to me that these people have never really made anything, or they've forgotten what it is to make something. Not that I think everything is great. Obviously there's a space for critique and for, harsh critique at that. But this idea that people would intentionally make garbage, you know what I mean? I in most cases, especially once I met the creators of things that I thought were really subpar, they knew once it was going out the door, and they were like, oh God, and they wished it could have been different. And, things worked against them, or they were better on the other side of it, but you're not going to see that because you're only seeing the result of the pain that led to the learning,
Right. Yeah.
And so nowadays, when I was in school, when you're in college, university, you think you know everything. You're just adult enough to think that you know everything. We're going to solve the world and we're going to whatever. And that idealism is very important. But you look at a project and you go, oh, this is trash. I could do better than this. And that's your only standing. And now I see something trash and I go, oh, no one was happy with that. No one felt good. That went out the door and everyone just went like, please never bring it up again. Like that was just a rough ride. And I've had a few of those. So I can be, you can, I would be shocked if I met anyone involved in that and they were like, yeah, thumbs up, we rocked it, So it's just a different kind of a mode, I guess, in that sense.
That makes sense. When you're going through that process, how do you identify what's sacred, what can't be changed? And I'm not talking, we know about the IP rules, we know about honoring the player fantasy, but
like
how do you?
Personal.
Yeah.
You kind of come up with your own personal unshakable core. And sometimes you'll surprise yourself, stuff that you think is unshakable, and then you realize later maybe it's not. Like Conan the Barbarian feels like the guardrails they should be pretty strong, considering 90 plus years of literary history, 50 plus years in comics. And yet sometimes I'm surprising myself with ideas I come up with, and I go, I don't know if we can do that. And then I go, we have to do that. Like I did one of the newer arcs. It's now in collection called Frozen Faith. And I wanted to deal with this idea of, Conan is not like other Sumerians. He leaves Samaria. He has this wanderlust. Very few of his people leave the confines of their country and go forth and do the things that he does, let alone he is the legend that he becomes. And so I thought, if that's the kind of character who would question everything, clearly he's not going to stay within your systems. He's not going to stay within your whatever, he questions civilization and he questions barbarism, and he becomes a good leader because he is not like other men. So why would he just lockstep and immediately go, yep, Crom, got it. That's our faith. We do it all the same way. And no questions. You're just like, no, this is the guy who would push up against those limits almost immediately. But no one had ever done a story where Conan says maybe there's no Crom, and religion just seemed not a fourth rail, but like something you're not supposed to delve. Like, a lot of fantasy worlds, they deal with religion in a just like alien races in a lot of sci-fi. Like all the Klingons are like this because it's just easier, right? Like we don't want to have. I mean, humankind gets to be incredibly complicated and messy and murky, but all the Klingons are like this, and all the elves are like that, and all the dwarves are like that because
Right.
we just want to put them in a bucket and then understand how they function. You know what I mean? And so one of the things I've been trying to do with the Hyborian Age and with Conan is to sort of say, no, like I think even within these religions there are people that wax and wane and question. And within these armies, there are people who are loyal and disloyal and complexities, just like there is in human history. And that will make that world feel more full, not less, that will be more interesting, morally and emotionally, and gives us more fertile ground to explore. And so, but it's the kind of thing that at first blush, you would immediately go, don't do that. No, 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 no. But that's not canon. And you're like, okay, but we're not saying that none of the canon exists. Clearly, at some point later in his career, Conan's on board with the Crom train, but it's like, when did he get back on board and why? And that was
Right.
one of the things that I wanted to sort of play with. And yet, if you'd have told me 2 years ago, hey, you're going to have Conan messing with his faith, I'd have been like, no, it's a terrible idea. You don't do that. Dude, it's like Crom, Mountain King, let's go, and that's, so it's interesting. Yeah, I think you do create a certain pillars, in your temple of your idea for this metaphor is going to fall apart real fast. Um, but you have to be willing to sort of change or re-examine them, I think, as you go, and I
Fair
think,
enough.
Marvel had some unshakable internal rules, right? Like, Uncle Ben's never going to come back and neither will Bucky Barnes. And you're like, oh, yet, Ed Brubaker found a way to bring back Bucky Barnes and made it now this core pillar of Captain America history that the character feels almost deficient without the Winter Soldier, and
Sure.
so it's not to say, ooh, man, my Uncle Ben resurrection story is going to be real good. It's just that don't assume that it's unexplorable just because,
Right.
and make sure you've got a good story and emotional core to back it, and be willing to sort of push and pull. And if there's no story there, there's no story there. That's okay.
Yeah.
There's probably a good reason it doesn't get delved into, but don't completely close yourself off.
Makes sense. With the Crom thing, it sounds like you didn't really break canon. You kind of just added to it more.
Yeah, it's additive, and it came about in such an odd way because Doug Braithwaite, was the artist who was doing, he had done one arc of the story. He did the second story arc called Thrice Marked for Death. And I loved working with him. He's a phenomenal artist. I've been a huge fan of his for years. And I wanted to entice him to stay on the book. And he's known for doing short runs on things, not long runs. And so I knew we were kind of grinding up against his typical kind of working pattern, but he had a great time and I'd had a great time. So I had to put the sort of breadcrumbs out there like, hey, stick around, we'd love to keep working with you. And he said he was interested, but he specifically wanted to do a story set in the frozen North because Frank Frazetta has like 3 or 4 of these Conan pieces that are set in the North that are so iconic. And that was what he thought of as real, intrinsic Conan. And he wanted to draw that kind of stuff.
Right.
And I said, okay. And there was only one canon Conan story set in the North, with his Frost Giant's daughter, which is super. It's been adapted phenomenally well beforehand. So why would you ever try and do that? And we'd specifically said we weren't just going to do adaptation. So all of a sudden I was like, oh God, now we're playing with all these ingredients that I wasn't planning to play with, but I really want to please Doug. And I really, okay, so what else can we do up in the North? Well, what if we're telling a story around Frost Giant's daughter? Well, why is he there? So then I posited this idea that according to the canon, that's the earliest Conan story in terms of his life. Like Robert E. Howard wrote the Conan stories out of order. The very first story, he's already a king. And then we jump around the timeline. And in Frost Giant's daughter, he's the youngest that he is in any of the stories. And so I sort of had this idea of, well, he interacts with a god, Is that the first time he ever interacts with the supernatural? Like, did he grow up not interacting with the supernatural? And this is this really powerful moment. Okay. And if that's true, maybe that's where his faith gets tested and boom, boom, boom. So it started to just kind of, not to get too corny, snowball from there. that there was more story we could tell, that we could adapt the Frost Giant's Daughter, but then build all this connective tissue to bigger ideas about faith and loss and, self-definition versus the spirit world and all kinds of different stuff that I hadn't quite seen in a Conan story before. And it went from like, oh, we can't do that, to like, oh, I'm really excited now. Now I have to convince everyone else this is the right direction to go, So that was kind of fun. And it's interesting to think that it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't wanted to really keep Doug Braithwaite on board. Like I just wouldn't have done that, And now I look at it and I go, man, it's such an important story and I'm so glad we did it. But that's the creative process. You never know where you're going to find things. And then everyone on social media pointing out my earlier interviews where we were never going to adapt, existing Conan stories because they'd all been done so well. And they were like 6 months after you said that, you did it. And you're like, yeah, that naive guy from 6 months ago doesn't know what he's talking about,
That's so cool. When you adapt something like that, how do you keep it true? How do you, you're adding something new? How do you make it still feel like it belongs?
I'm in the middle of that right now. So we're doing these event books every fall for the Conan series. So we've got a regular monthly, book, and then we have these special kind of 4-issue miniseries we're doing each fall. And so the first one was Battle of the Blackstone, and that was an all original story. And now this one we're doing this fall is called Scourge of the Serpent. And I'm using some existing Robert E. Howard stories and kind of weaving them together in unexpected ways, given myself quite a conundrum because it's that exact thing of trying to keep all the pieces that weave together really well and then subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, kind of cleaving off some of the pointy bits that don't quite flow with the overarching narrative and symbolism that we want the story to have.
Right.
And I don't have an easy answer for you. Like part of it's instinct and part of it's editorial and part of it's that back and forth process of talking your way through the problem. I need the feeling and the atmosphere and the drive to be here and the symbolism makes sense. And all these things point that way. And this one little hair is sticking out. And I'm just like, I'm just gonna just put it down, but other points you just sort of like, is this work in the medium that we're working in? So comics are different from, prose, obviously. And so there are these conversations in some of the Robert E. Howard stories that are actually quite interesting to read on the page because in your mind, it's this tense kind of thing. But if I did it line for line for line for line, you're like, this is 4 pages of not blather, but get to the point. In a visual medium, talking heads is not what we're here for. We got to get to the thrust, and the thrust is usually violence. And, this is Conan, like there's swords are coming out and people are going to die and all that stuff. So how can we do a cutaway or transform that scene, give characters more visual things to do and more motivated kind of physicality that the artist is going to enjoy drawing instead of just this banter, back and forth on the page. And so the spirit of the thing has that energy of pulp and explosive quality because of the page count and because of playing into, an artistic medium instead of a word-centric medium. And so you sort of have to look and go, in the spirit of the thing, we're getting the important part out there. That if we did it too literal, it would lose energy, and that doesn't feel like good pulp writing. So I'll take it upon myself to figure out which lines are the absolute most key ones and then cut the other stuff away and wipe the, bead of sweat and keep it going. Yeah.
Something that comes to mind when around conversations like this is always you're working in so many constraints. There's rules coming from all different sides and expectations. Those constraints help you or hinder you? Do they build creativity?
The comic medium is a constraint. I was working with someone who'd never done comics before. They'd only done prose. And they were used to just, write the chapter until it feels done, right? And I was like, well, we've got, 6 pages for this scene. And they're just like, well, what if we need more? And you're like, then you're taking it from something else because we have 20 pages or 22 pages per issue.
Right.
So steal from Peter to pay Paul or whatever may have you. But we got 22 pages, right? So if you want that double page moment, something else is going to be changed in order to make room for it. Even the primacy of the page turn, right? So in comics, you got your 2 pages. We always flip into a new scene, right? So I want something transformative and interesting to happen on the page turn, not on the facing page. I don't want to be like, who's the murderer? I already know because I can see in my peripheral vision, it's the bad guy. I want to go, it's the bad guy. I want to flip into that thing. So that's a constraint that of the physical printed medium that you don't worry about when you're writing a prose novel. It's not like you're like, well, we got to make sure this one, the murder is revealed on the next page. Like, it's a visual medium. And so there's a limitation there that you have to play within that scope to get the most power out of it. And if you don't do it, people will consciously or subconsciously feel that it's weaker for it. And so you just get used to that. That's part of the playing. It's like, in film, you've got cuts and fades, and that's part of the medium. That's what you're playing with, And so, like any art form, you start to understand that those limitations become part of the rhythm. They become part of how you think in terms of storytelling. And when they're in sync with each other, people don't notice it because they're too busy enjoying the thing. And when you do it wrong, no one will think of anything else but how, asynchronous it all kind of feels. And so I don't know, the longer you do it, it's like anything. The more you do it, the more instinctive it becomes. I remember Nyla Inukshuk, she's the documentary filmmaker. We worked together and we made Snowguard, that the indigenous superhero character in the Champions. And we went out for a story jam session to do this Champions annual. And it was great because all 3 of us on the team, so the artist Marcus Toe and Nyla and I, who were co-writing it, we were able to physically go out and have lunch together and break down the story. So everyone could be in the same room, which is so rare to be able to do with a comic book creative team. And we figured out all the important parts of the story. And Nyla had a bunch of great, her experiences, living up north and all that stuff. Like, culturally, she could tell us a whole bunch of cool things that we can incorporate into the story. And then I was bringing all my like classic kind of Marvel drama and beats and action and all that kind of stuff. And then Marcus is a phenomenal artist, and these are different visual things he was excited to draw. And we had all that material at the table. And then I just wrote down, I think we had 20 pages, and I just wrote 1 to 20 on a piece of paper. And I said, well, you need this for your opening and you need this for your ending. And then this scene is here, and that's the page turn there. And we got 3 pages here before that big moment happens. And we're 3/4 of the way through. That's the payoff. We got 4 pages to take us out. And it took like 15 minutes for me to break the story in terms of pacing. And she just goes, that was a magic trick. And I was like, no, it's obvious. Like, it's obvious. But that's because I've written thousands of pages of comics, right?
Right.
Like, she films documentaries. So I would look at 40 hours of material you just filmed and be like, we're dead. What do we do with all this crap? And she would go, this is the important moment, or that's the sound bite, or then we're going to transition to the next scene, because film is her medium, right? Like, and so it was just fascinating to sort of realize, without trying to sound crass, like that there was an expertise there, and that I could take all this information and just sort of distill it down and go, boom, there's the template, not in terms of like cold, hard formula, but in terms of this is going to have a nice flow and a beat and a rhythm, and action's going to get its place and drama's going to get its place, and the location gets established, and it's a full container, and we can make this work, And so there's something kind of fun about that in terms of constraints, once you appreciate what they are and what you can bring to them, and not grind against the gears. Yeah.
That makes sense. It sounds like the structure of the constraints actually help your creative process.
And they can. Yeah. Once you understand them, I think that's the thing.
There you go.
And it's not to say that you should never push up against them. Like, it's just, fight how many hills do you want to die on kind of thing. Like, if I'm going to my editor and I'm saying, I know we said 22 pages, but what if it was 24? Like, you better come with a pretty tight legal case, because this is going to change it's going to change the budget. It's going to change the way the book's printed. It's going to change the number of ads, all the typical systems that they're used to moving through, the publishing process. You've just said, I'm special. And it's like, why? Why? You know what I mean? You want a gatefold, flip open cover? Why? Is this a big anniversary? Are we going to change the cover price? What are we doing that is making it worth your scratch and sniff die cut crazy holographic whatever we're doing?
Have you ever run into a constraint that felt completely arbitrary and frustrating and didn't make sense? Or
Yeah, I mean, playing in a shared, I mean, it's not that it didn't make sense. You're just frustrated by what it is. So, playing in the shared Marvel or DC universe, those superhero universes are amazing because there's these incredible sandboxes you get to play in and there's all these cool toys, but every so often you don't get to work with it the way you want. You can't use that thing because they're using it over here, or there's an event coming, so that character's going to die, or that thing's that you set up is no longer a priority, or actually we're rebooting the whole thing, so you're going to wrap this thing up in 3 months instead of 8. And you're just like, oh my God. And then readers are like, it felt rushed. And you're like, boy, did it, like stuff like that. And you're trying not to throw your collaborators under the bus. But on the other hand, you need to sort of like a little flag where you're like, it wasn't me. I swear I know what I'm doing. Like there was a plan. Like, so that kind of stuff. It's that weird balancing act where you're fighting for your little portion and trying to justify it as much as possible, but understanding some parts of it cannot be. Yes, our job is communication and entertainment, like I said before, but other times the train is coming your way and you're like, wait, there's a track right through my house. And you're like, surprise, this thing's just gonna plow its way through. And you kind of have to make your peace with it. And part of your job in that Sarah, is to make the best of it and grin and bear it and be, oh, I hate the term because it's not always a good idea, but be the good soldier. But you're like, but I'm not just taking bullets all the time. Like sometimes I do have to lead the charge, or sometimes like someone else has got to take the flak on this one. Like, right. Do you remember the one I took a couple months back? Now it's your turn, and I never want to be like mean-spirited about this stuff, but I've known a couple people, I've seen them at the early portion of their career. They're very bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and they have been like, I'm going to run into all the crossfire. Like, they're just like, they offer me this project. And I go, you don't want that project. And they're just like, no, it's going to be great. I've always wanted. I'm like, I have some bad news for you. That one is just a landmine with a little bit of perfume on top. I don't know what. Oh my God. And then you just see it explode. And they're like, what happened? And you're like, lots of moving parts. That's what happened there. You got caught between the gears, so, and I've been there. So yeah, it's complicated. I definitely felt it. It's hard for me to talk about specifics without throwing all kinds of or gigantic corporations under the bus. To see why me, but that I will tell you with almost unerring accuracy, if you're reading a story and it feels like it was cut short, or you see a bunch of material in a monthly book and it seems to be leading towards a plot line, and then that thing just gets cut at the knees, that was not by choice. Right.
There you go.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, buddy, let's wrap up the core topic here. Let's bring it full circle. I have discovered a lot of my audience is narrative designers and game writers working in digital games. So I always kind of look for something that is applicable to their world. So is there a nugget from all of this, some advice that could be contributing to what they're doing about working inside of IP without losing your voice?
I think the thing is, it's interesting. Right now, I'm actually negotiating to work on a video game project, which is going to be a fun little challenge for me as well. And the flexibility and the very different kind of pacing of how digital content gets made in sort of sections and pieces, and you're being brought on multiple times during development potentially. I think the key here is, it's true of any creative project, just really good communication and letting people know what you need and what you're getting and what you want, but trying to have as much empathy for everyone else who's doing all the same things, that it's not just the you party. You know what I mean? That you're like, okay, if you're getting stuck doing some really menial part of that job, not just being like, oh, woe is me, but also kind of saying, okay, this is part of what needs to get done and this is what I'm doing in it. I would love to also branch out and add more, or how can we make these what feels like a very generic and kind of stayed part of the process? Can we make this more fun? Can we make this more engaging? Can we bring this into the broader narrative in unexpected ways? Or can we get the artists involved earlier so that we don't just feel like they're the art robots? I think that's a real mistake that people have, where they're like, okay, we're the story people and they're the art people, and we'll give them orders and they'll draw it. And you're like, but what if we all jam together? Or you'd be surprised, bringing in someone who doesn't know, isn't an expert in your IP, can actually be a really engaging and exciting thing, because you have to justify stuff that you've taken for granted. When I did the Dungeons and Dragons comic series in 2014, alongside the launch of 5th edition D&D, John Barber was a great comic book editor, and he wasn't a D&D player. And you'd think that that would be a real negative, but it was a huge positive, because I knew D&D and I knew that the Wizards of the Coast license approval person, the first one we worked with was this amazing guy named Adam Lee. He and we had the tabletop thing on lock. But what we really needed every so often was someone just to make sure our heads were directly up our asses, and that we were playing so hard to the hardcore that your average person couldn't read this thing without just thinking, I don't even understand this world or these places. John was wonderful to read and go, this is a good story about clear characters in a fantasy world. Not just like, no, man, that deep cut, that you guys did of Forgotten Realms lore. There's going to be 20 people that are going to be so happy, and you're one of them, yes, put those little fun things in there, but make sure that it still plays broad, that it still works, that I know what these characters want and why, and that the emotional center works and all that stuff. So, I think that that's always a really good thing. Don't be afraid to pitch this past whatever you want to call it, your average person, the people who aren't deeply invested. That isn't to say that you're going to make whatever, I hate that term, the 4-quadrant kind of media property. Yes, you have a fan base for a reason, and you should lean into them and not forget them.
Yeah.
But it's okay to also just make sure it's not completely an enclosed, lockbox of the hardcore,
That's good.
And that I think is really, really important. And it can become a lot more satisfying on the other end if you can engage people who you never expected.
That's good stuff. And it's important to remember, for a medium as collaborative as digital games, like, it's all collaboration. Yeah. So good
totally.
stuff.
Yeah. I watched a really great video. Oh, now I need to find the thing. So there's a pretty big, channel called Game Maker's Toolkit. You must have watched on YouTube. It's fantastic. Yep. And that dude, he did a video that was like, I think 10 years worth of videos. He had to summarize all the things he's learned over the last decade of doing those videos. And there was just such good advice that wasn't video game centric. It was very much about working with teams and good communication, and realizing that a project had changed from the initial plan, and that you had to lean into what it was becoming instead of trying to force something to be the original thing that it no longer was, stuff like that. And I just thought, man, this is applicable across all mediums. It's not just a video game thing. Yeah.
100%. I took a narrative design course. Will Shen taught it. And so much of it was just interpersonal communications and how to work with teams. And it's so
funny. I talk to people all the time, and they'll talk about their frustrations on a project, and without trying to sound, and it's not like I've never had them, but like half the answers end up being, well, have you talked to the rest of the team about this? And they're, oh, I can't do that. And you're like, well, okay. It's almost like therapy. Like, why can't you talk to the rest of the team? What's going on? Like, and half the tension being built here is people's assumptions rather than, clearing the air, right? Like, if you could just break through and go, hey, this is other stuff that's going on in my life. I don't need to give you my entire family history and every bit of gossip and drama happening in and around me, but here are all these, just, kind of the rough checklist of what's going on right now. And I'm doing the best I can. And this is what I'm feeling on this end. how can we get through this and be stronger for it on the other side? And the respect that that can earn you, rather than people feeling like, oh, they won't think I'm perfect and therefore I'll lose my job or something, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
All right, buddy, that wraps up the core topic. I do obviously have a philosophical question I ask every time, but I already asked it of you at least twice, maybe 3 times. So I had to come up with a new one. I got a new one just for you.
Philosophize me.
All right. And it's applicable to this topic of adaptive storytelling, actually. So
Cool.
it all works. All right. So when you're creating in a world like D&D, Conan, Rick and Morty, whatever it is,
Sure.
you're adding to something that thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people already emotionally live inside of.
Damn.
No
Yeah.
pressure, right?
Sure.
What kind of responsibility or opportunity even does that give us as storytellers, give you as a storyteller, especially considering things like societal shifts, changes in human rights awareness, development of humanity in general?
What is our job? It's complicated. But that's just a cheat if I just say it's complicated. Here's the thing. So I think there's obviously theme and story and emotions are going to move through a lot of different material. And some of those materials are going to feel even more pointed and poignant at certain points in time. And whether you're working with existing IP and you realize that doesn't play anymore, you can keep the core of the thing intact and address it without necessarily having to shoot off gigantic firecrackers and go, look what I just fixed. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think one of the problems that you'll see a lot of audiences have is that some of the creators can get into a mode where they're maybe too clever by half, or they're too obsessed with getting the gold star for having done the thing that they think is right, instead of crafting a damn good, entertaining story first and foremost. Which isn't to say that we can't learn through stories or that these things aren't there to be taught, but it's just, is that when we talk about those unalienable pillars, is this what we're doing, or are you going out of your way to drag this thing kicking and screaming towards your end goal, which is, I'm going to wag my finger at you and tell you you've done it wrong up till this point, especially to a fan base that is clearly loves the thing that you're now working with, which isn't to say you can't change or it shouldn't shift or there's nowhere to go. It's just, in what spirit are you doing that thing? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So let me give you a very pertinent example. So the pulp writing of authors like Robert E. Howard uses language and looks at the world in the lens of the 1920s and 30s. And there are moral elements, and there are racial elements, and there are sexual elements in those stories that are rooted in the pulps that don't play in the modern era. And so do we then sand every single, sharp, pointy edge off of this thing and lose some of the inherent qualities? Or do we look and say, these ones can be lost or can be changed, and can be changed in a way that is just moving forward in terms of heroic, adventurous storytelling, right? So do I have a diverse array of heroes and villains across an entire spectrum and have them all be pretty strong and badass and cool? And that inherently says something, that anyone can be a hero and anyone can be a villain and anyone can be flawed and anyone can be strong?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I have two characters telling each other how old precepts of these things are wrong and we're going to do better now? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
That's the thing, show not tell kind of stuff, and action over preaching or whatever may have you. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's kind of the direction that I'm trying to go with this stuff. Not to say nothing can ever change or this stuff is perfect in every respect, but it's like watching any old film, reading any old book, any piece of history. You have to look at it in the context of when it was made, and then you look at what I'm doing now in the context of when it's being made, and trying to understand and ratify those things and not burn it all down. And that can be really, really hard because it's not just mine to decide, right? And other people are going to judge it through those lenses, and they have every right to do so. And so there is no perfect answer, and not everyone is going to come to the same conclusions. And some people are going to say, it's too much. There's too much baggage. We can't deal with this. It's all got to go. And you've got to sort of be at peace with some people not liking what is done, what has been done and what will be done. And it can be sort of fascinating to struggle with it. It can be sort of fascinating to look at, one of the courses I taught, at Seneca was animation history. And we were watching, frankly, really racist cartoons from the 1920s and 30s and 40s, not because we were glorifying them, but because we were saying this was part of, war propaganda, and this was part of Hollywood, and this was part of broader structural things that were happening. And we're not going to pretend they didn't happen, and we can learn from them and we can understand them in the broader context of the art form and then carry onward. And that's kind of the context with which they were created, Yeah. And if we were so something like Cuphead takes the rubber hose animation of the Fleischer Studio and the Van Buren and a bunch of these other studios of the time, and imbues all the energy and the kooky quality and the wonderful design sense into that video game without saying, and we're going to bring all the racist stereotypes alongside it, right? Those are not intrinsic to the art form or intrinsic to the style or intrinsic to what made that animation great. That's a quality that we can strip aside and sort of say, we're going to leave that in the dustbin of the past and try and lift up the things that make this fun and kooky and feel like a cartoon from, the Roaring '20s. Yeah.
I love that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Yeah,
that was really thoughtful.
I'm trying. And it's like I said, it's never easy. And, it's something that the goalpost is going to be, moving, and you've got to sort of make your peace with, okay, that's where it was. That's where it is. That's who we are. That's what we're doing. And not learn at every turn and try not to beat yourself up, about things that are in the rearview mirror. And if you learn how to do that, please let me know, because I think we're all trying to figure it out.
Hell yeah, buddy. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up around here. Before I head out the door, I do like to open up a little space for signal boosting. What you got going on? What's happening? Where can people find you? Hit me with all of it.
It's always, I can't help but feel this rush of pride sort of burst through me as I say. My name is Jim Zub. I'm the flagship writer of Conan the Barbarian, which is the oddest, craziest thing I ever could have imagined. I've still got Stacy and I are working on some new D&D books, through the Young Adventurers guides and related kind of line of books that have grown up out of those, which are amazing. And then I've got another Marvel Comics project that hasn't been announced yet. I have no idea when it's going to get announced, that I'm sort of chipping away at as well. So the easiest way to stay on top of what I'm doing is just go to jimzub.com, JIMZUB.com. There's tutorials, interviews, my newsletter, the Zub Stack, that you can keep track of my many ridiculous adventures.
Perfect. Sweet. All right, buddy. We're going to wrap it up. Awesome. Well, as I push you out the door, I would love to give you the last word. Do you have any party words of wisdom? That could be craft, could be life, just something. Take us out.
I know you have big creative aspirations, but don't be afraid or never forget to celebrate the little victories happening right now.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Corner Story and Game. A huge thank you to Jim for bringing your clarity and creativity to the conversation on adaptive storytelling. It has become obvious, to me at least, that you are a narrative craftsman working at the edge between reverence and reimagination, and we all can learn something from studying your work. And to you, dear listener, thank you for taking your seat at the table. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the podcast, leave a review, and Kate, come join the conversation over on Discord. Until next time, keep telling stories, playing games, and creating worlds worth getting lost in. Stay safe out there, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the corner of Story and Game.